Today we're going to be talking about the art of Mesopotamia, mainly the Tigris and the Euphrates area. So here we can see the Tigris and the Euphrates. Sumerians who lived in this area were skilled in developing irrigation systems using canals and dikes to transform their frequently flooded lands. The intersection of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers was the place where some of the first civilizations emerged. From ancient times, empires arose and fell in this river basin, including Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, Assyria, Abbasid Caliphate, and the civilization of ancient Mesopotamia grew up along the banks of these two great rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. In the midst of a vast desert, the people of Mesopotamia relied upon these rivers to provide them with drinking water, agricultural irrigation, and major transportation routes. For 3,000 years, the people of Mesopotamia maintained a significant degree of cultural unity, even though politically they were fragmented. The rulers of various regions, Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria, dominated Mesopotamia as a whole at one time or another. During times of great political unity, kings expanded their control beyond the two rivers, dominating the neighboring lands and controlling the trade routes of the Near East. The earliest known attempts at forming large-scale empires were made by the Sumerian and the Akkadian kings in the late 3rd millennium before Christ. This area is the site of many important archaeological digs. Here we have a timeline of how Sumer developed, and there we can see, from 5,000 to about 23,075 before Christ. And then if we move forward, here we can see Sargon, 2350, Lagash, 2110, the Namu or and the shift in the Euphrates River and collapse of life at Nippur and other cities in Sumer to upon the 1595 when we see the Hittite raids, and it disrupts the entire unity of Sumer and Akkad. So the first thing I want to talk about is the ziggurat. So ziggurats were huge stepped structures with a summit and far above the ground, and it was used as a temple. The temple would have been to the city god. The city ziggurat would easily be the most conspicuous building in the entire city, and it towered above any visitors coming to the city. So it showed great strength to anybody who would visit. The ziggurat was not just a religious center, but also a center of civic pride. Any visitor could not just see the ziggurat. The ziggurats were built on such an immense scale in the time of Hammurabi, they would sometimes reach the height of 150 feet. Around the base, there might be more temples, or in some cases, accommodations for the high priests. So here's a ziggurat that's largely reconstructed, and this is from 2100 before Christ, and it's made with mud brick and baked brick. And this is Tel El Mukhayar in Iraq. This is what's left of the Anu ziggurat. The earliest proper ziggurats were built by Namu in 2112 to 2095, a late Sumerian king of Ur. They were built in 3 stages, but later ziggurats had as many as 7 different steps to get all the way. Like the angle, if you look, instead of like straight like a pyramid, it was stepped, right? Another thing that we see in Mesopotamia is writing. So the earliest writing in Mesopotamia was picture writing, invented by the Sumerians, who wrote on clay tablets using a long reed. The script the Sumerians invented and handed down to the Semitic people who conquered Mesopotamia in later centuries is called cuneiform, which is derived from 2 Latin words, cuneus, meaning wedge, and forma, meaning to shape. So cuneiform. And it was basically what we call concept writing. So there were images to show what they were talking about. So here's some of the symbols that were used in cuneiform, and there we have a bull's head, and you can see kind of how it evolved. So originally it would be really like a drawn head, and then eventually we had these little marks, and these eventually form into different letters. So the Semites who adopted this writing, however, spoke an entirely different language. In fact, a language as different from Sumerian as English is, probably from Japanese. In order to adapt this foreign writing to a Semitic language, the Akkadians converted it in part to a syllabic writing system. Individual signs represented entire syllables. In addition to syllable symbols, here are examples of cuneiform symbols, ideograms, picture words represented on an entire word. These ideograms might also, in other contexts, be simply syllables. Okay. Let's take a look at Sumerian spirituality. So information about Sumerian gods and goddesses is found on the Sumerian king list, as well as Sumerian clay tablets and their cylinder seals. We'll talk about those in a minute. The Sumerian king lists record all the rulers of earth back over 400,000 years. The huge stretch of time, coupled with reigns into the thousands of years, has caused most historians to reject its accuracy. However, all the early rulers were gods. They were immortals. The king list does record a reign of Enmeduranki, whose name meant ruler who connects the heavens or sky and the earth, the ground. These gods were called the Nephilim or Elohim, the Anuki meaning those from heaven who came to earth. In Sumerian mythology, they were a pantheon of good gods and bad gods, all of who came to earth to create the human race. The main gods are Anu, Nuhursag, who was female, and Lil, Aniki, also called Ea. A Sumerian tablet found Enduranki, a prince in Sippar, who was well loved by Anu, Elil, and Ea. Shamash, a priest in the Bright Temple, appointed him, then took him to the assembly of the gods. They showed him how to observe oil on water and many other secrets of Anu, Elil, and Ea. Then they gave him the divine tablet, the Kibdu secret of heaven and earth. They taught him how to make calculations with numbers. And the people of ancient civilizations, Sumerians, Egyptians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Hittites, and Hebrews, in their second writings, all describe gods that physically dwelt on the earth. This was aside from their writings on philosophy and mysticism. The next piece is the sacred geometry. So this is the truth, the tetrahedron Binah, understanding of 4 outer vertices and 4 faces. So what is the sacred geometry? The sacred symbols or sacred geometry represent the building blocks of life in the universe. The creation of life can be traced from 5 Platonic sacred symbols: the tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, and the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron are the only shapes that are perfectly inside of a sphere. This means that all the points of each symbol touch the spherical surface. Another way to say it is that if each of the 5 Platonic sacred symbols is rotating in all directions, it will produce the image of a sphere. The people of ancient civilizations, including those that I've spoken of before, the Sumerians right to the Hebrews, in their sacred writings, all describe gods that physically dwelt on earth. This was aside from their writings on philosophy and mysticism and the common theme of their sacred geometry. So let's take a look at some of their sculpture. So this is a portrait head of a ruler, so we can see, how much we've moved further along in a bronze. And these are their cylinder seals. So when they would, write about things, they would affix a cylinder seal. So this was said, this is who wrote it. It was like a signature. And here we see them carved in different stones. So there's blue chalcedon, carnelian, agate, and gray chalcedon. And here we have some more cylinder seals. This is a chlorite seal, and it's late Akkadian, possibly Neo-Sumerian, around 2200 before Christ. It is a female figure and a god identified by his horned headdress. They sit on either side of a date palm. Beside them is a snake. In the last century, this seal was known as the Adam and Eve seal because it was thought to depict a scene from the Bible. Enki was the god who created the first humans, according to the Sumerians. The wise one of Eridu, Ea, created him as a model of men. His name was Adapa, or Adam in the Old Testament. Elohim created the Adam in his image. In the image of Elohim created he him. Enki walks out of the water to the land. Enki is attended by the god with two faces called Usmu, or Isamud. So there we see it on the cylinder seal. This is, we'll talk a little bit about Queen Puhabe. The Ur site excavated by Leonard Woolley and his team contained about 1,800 burial sites. Woolley classified 16 of these as royal based on their distinctive form, their wealth, and the fact that they contained burials of servants and other high-ranking personages, along with the royal person. The royal cemetery tomb of Queen Puhabe, like the tomb of King Tutankhamun, was an especially extraordinary find because it was intact, having escaped looting throughout the millennia. The tomb featured a vaulted chamber set at the bottom of a deep death pit. The lady was buried lying in a wooden bier and was identified by a cylinder seal bearing her name that was found on her body. The seal is carved in cuneiform and it is written in Sumerian. So the University of Pennsylvania collection includes one of the world's earliest known musical instruments. So these are things that would be similar to what was found in Queen Puhabe's grave. A large wooden lyre, reconstructed from the exacting measurements made by the original excavators, with the original gold and lapis lazuli bull's head and inlaid plaque depicting mythical animals drinking and performing. The University of Pennsylvania collection includes many other instruments as well. This is the stele of Naram-Sin. A stele is a monument, or sculpture if you will, composed of a single column or shaft typically erected to commemorate an important event or an important person. And many times these would be like in a city center, so everyone would be reminded of who the person was. So the Akkadians under Sargon dominated the Sumerians about 2300 before Christ. Naram-Sin was Sargon's grandson. The godlike Akkadian kings ruled with absolute authority. Naram-Sin's title was King of the Four Quarters, meaning ruler of the world. Damaged on both the top and the bottom, the Naram-Sin stele depicts the king's defeat of the Lullaby people. The stele is unique in two regards. Most conquest depictions are shown horizontal, while the king being at the top or the center. This stele depicts the victory in a diagonal, with the king still being at the top center, but where everyone else can look up to him. The second unique aspect of the piece is that Naram-Sin is shown wearing a bull-horned helmet, or shown as the face of a lion. Helmets of this type, at the time when the stele was commissioned, were only worn by gods. This stele is in essence telling the viewer that Naram-Sin is a victorious conqueror as a result of his divine status. In other words, he has the grace of God with him. That's what he's trying to say to the people. But it is also showing Naram-Sin gazing up toward two stars, showing that Naram-Sin is a god, a feat that was up to this point only achieved by deceased kings. But he is still the most powerful of gods. The king also has numerous accoutrements signifying his status and his authority. He's wearing the helmet. He is carrying various weapons, a spear, and a bow. And the two stars are thought to be Ishtar and another god. So he's still like looking up. There's the mountain, and you can see, I mean, this is a pretty gruesome scene, like where he's really killing his enemies, and you can see the, kind of spear going through one of their throats, and and they're sort of stomping on the bodies of the other ones, and his soldiers all around him, in this battle, this victorious battle. The Akkadian Empire collapsed after 2 centuries of rule. During the succeeding 50 years, local kings ruled independent city-states in southern Mesopotamia. The city-state of Lagash produced a remarkable number of statues of its kings, as well as Sumerian literary hymns and prayers under the rule of Gudea. This was around 2150 before Christ, and his son Ur-Ningersu, 2125 to 2100 before Christ. Unlike the art of the Akkadian period, which was characterized by naturalism, the works produced by the Neo-Sumerian culture are pervaded by a sense of a pious reserve and kind of like a serenity, like they have this almost monk-like experience. And then notice like the hat and the repetitive, design there. Look at the eyebrows, just the mouth. We're not really smiling, but we're not sad. It's like this. And here's another. We can look at the way the hands are sort of folded. The sculpture belongs to a series of diorite statues commissioned by Gudea, who devoted his energies to rebuilding the temples of Lagash and installing statues of himself inside them. Many inscribed with his name and divine dedication survive. Here, Gudea is depicted in the seated pose of a ruler before his subjects, his hands folded in a traditional gesture of greeting and prayer. The Sumerian inscription on his robe lists the various temples that he has built or renovated in Lagash and named the statue itself, Gudea, the man who built the temple. May his life be long and prosperous. This is from Ur. This is the stele of Hammurabi. It is not only famous in Sumeria, Babylon, located northwest of Ur on the Euphrates River, also rose to power. One of the greatest rulers in Babylon was named Hammurabi. Hammurabi took control of Babylon in 1792 before Christ. Mesopotamia was made up of separate warring city-states. Hammurabi's goal was to conquer all of Mesopotamia and to unite all of the city-states into one country. He spent for the first 31 years of his reign building his military power and making allies. In 1761, before Christ, he began a military campaign to conquer the surrounding city-states, and within 5 years, he did it. He controlled all of Mesopotamia. The stele of Hammurabi is over 7 feet tall, and it was made of basalt, which is a very, very hard stone. And it was inscribed with what is known as the law code of the Babylonian king Hammurabi, presenting to his people. The stele also bestowed Hammurabi with the authority to rule, coming directly from the gods, just like Naram-Sin, which would have given credence to the diverse people in his empire. There were almost 300 laws that were inscribed onto the stele. While Hammurabi's code was not the first of its kind, it is probably the most comprehensive, and it inspired many other people and groups throughout history, including Jewish laws, to be founded on the laws that were here. And they also have many of these laws in the Bible. Once he had brought peace to the region, Hammurabi turned his attention to law and order. He collected all existing codes and laws that were from all the different areas of his kingdom. And like I said, he wrote the Code of Hammurabi. It was written in 1750 before Christ. The main message throughout the code was that the strong should not hurt the weak. The code stated that the right of an individual was the model for many lay systems in later years. Hammurabi was known as a warrior and a strong king who ruled all of his people with fairness. He died in Babylon in 1708. This is the Lamassu. The Lamassu is a celestial being from ancient Mesopotamian religions, bearing the human head, symbolized intelligence, a bull's body, symbolizing strength, and the wings of an eagle to symbolize freedom. Sometimes it had horns and ears of a bull. Here's a pair of Lamassu figures flanking the gateway that's been restored from the palace of Sargon II from Khorsabad in 713 to 706 BC. So you can see how they're what we call bas relief, B-A-S relief. So they kind of come out of the wall, but they're not separately standing. This is Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was the king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and he had his reign from 669 before Christ to 631. It was the largest empire in the world, stretching from Cyprus in the west to Iran in the east, and at one point even included Egypt. Its capital, Nineveh, in modern-day Iraq, was the world's largest city. This is the time when the Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta were still in their infancy, and Rome was only a small settlement. Ashurbanipal wasn't modest about being the king of the Assyrian Empire. He called himself the king of the world. Quite a claim. But given the size of the empire, it wasn't that far from the truth at the time. The reliefs from the palace of King Ashurbanipal at Nimrod play an important role in portraying his power and the importance of his kingship. These reliefs are similar to other Assyrian reliefs in terms of their purpose. However, there is a contrast in the methods used to glorify the king. Ashurbanipal took Babylon and slaughtered many of its inhabitants in 648 before Christ. He then defeated Elam and sacked Susa. Elamite power disappeared. Under Ashurbanipal, Assyria reached the height of a sumptuous living. The famous lion hunts here at the royal palace at Nineveh date from his reign and are among the finest examples of ancient sculpture. Ashurbanipal was interested in learning, and excavations at Nineveh have uncovered 22,000 clay tablets that he kept in his library, the chief sources of knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia. Among the tablets were found copies of the Babylonian flood. There were copies of creationist stories that we see later in the Bible, and historical and scientific literature. His reign ended the greatness of the empire, although 2 of his sons ruled briefly after his death, and then Assyria succumbed to the Medes and the Persians only a few years later. And that kind of finishes out, what was happening in the Sumerian, Mesopotamian world between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Next, we're going to look at ancient Egypt.